pace, which is good because we have many more suttas. So let's keep going. So we have now been through the 4 persons, and then there's a 5th person, the last one. And of course, this person too should be removed resentment towards, and this is how it goes. How, friends, should resentment be removed toward the person whose bodily behavior are pure and who from time to time gains an opening of the mind, placidity of the mind? Suppose there were a pond with clear, sweet, cool water and clean with smooth banks, a delightful place shaded by various trees. Then a man might arrive afflicted and oppressed by the heat. Weary, thirsty and parched, plunged into the pond, he would bathe, drink, and then after coming out, he would sit or lie down in the shade of a tree right there. So too, when a person's bodily and verbal behavior are pure, and from time to time begins an opening of the mind, placidity of the mind, on that occasion one should attend to his pure bodily behavior, to his pure verbal behavior, and to the opening of the mind, the placidity of mind that he gains from time to time. In this way, resentment should be removed towards such a person. Friends, by means of a person who inspires confidence in every way, the mind gains confidence. These friends are the 5 ways of removing resentment, are means of which a bhikkhu can entirely remove resentment towards whomever it has arisen. So the last person here is the person who has all these good qualities, right? And of course, what is so strange is that we find that even if someone has all good qualities, still we get upset with them sometimes. Still people get upset by the Buddha. Still people get upset by people who are arahants. Still people get upset by people who have so many good qualities. And even then it is important to learn how to remove resentment towards such people. And of course in this case it is much easier. But even so, it needs to be, you need to actually do that, because of course it's very unfortunate to have resentment towards someone who is very spiritually attained, so you have to be very careful in this particular case. But I think the main thing about a person who is very pure in this way, who has the mental purity, the bodily purity and the verbal purity, the main thing about them is that actually it's quite easy to see the goodness of such a person, right? And that's why it says there towards the end, it says that by means of such a person who inspires confidence in every way, the mind gains confidence, right? It's like when you see someone who's very pure, when you see an arahant in the world, there is that beautiful saying somewhere in the Sutta that an arahant is a great blessing in the world, because even just seeing an arahant is a great blessing for people, because you see something. You know, as I was saying before, the inner quality, they shine out in your external conduct. It's not external conduct, it's not divorced from internal qualities. So when you see an arahant, it's like you get a glimpse into the mind of someone who is very special. You see the conduct, you see the kindness, you see the compassion, you see the peace. It kind of shines out to that person, right? And then you feel, wow, there's something very powerful going on here. And this is then what aids you to gain more confidence in the Buddha's teachings, because you're seeing something very beautiful. So it's worthwhile sometimes to hang out with people, as I say, hang out with people who are very pure, because it does give rise to confidence in this way. And perhaps what we are seeing here, I'm not entirely sure, but one possibility, we're seeing metta, of course, but perhaps also here we're seeing a bit of mudita, because there's so much beautiful qualities, it's very easy to have appreciative joy of such a person. So you can perhaps regard this as going from metta, then to karuna, and perhaps mudita. Perhaps I'm just imposing this on the sutta, but it seems a possibility anyway. So, this is how you overcome anger. This is how you remove resentment. Very useful teaching for all of us, I think. We all have this problem. Vast majority of people have this problem, so it's very useful. Before I move on to the next subject, I thought it might be handy to just discuss a little bit more about how to overcome anger in life, how to overcome ill will, because it is, I think, something very, very useful on the path. Of course, this being directly in the Sutta is very powerful, so please use this particular technique. I'm going to add just a few words of my own as well, on top of what we have seen already. And one of the ways that I have always found very powerful in removing ill will and anger is just to remind yourself of how little function, how little it actually works. If you become angry with someone, how ineffective way it is to try to change things. Usually the reason we get angry, if you investigate your own anger, is because we want something to change, right? We're not happy with the situation, we like to see change, so we get angry and upset. But does it actually work? In the vast majority of cases, it's counterproductive. If you want somebody to change and get angry with them, often they get defensive, right? They say, no, it's not my fault, I'm not to be blamed for this. This is wrong, it's wrong of you to kind of blame me for what's going on there. Nobody likes to feel that somebody is angry with them. So usually anger is counterproductive. And sometimes if anger does work, it's often because the people has fear, right? You're afraid. Somebody gets angry and you think, whoa, I better tread carefully here. So you do it just to please them because they're angry, not because you really want to. You're not actually getting anywhere. Anger doesn't actually get you anywhere. It creates defensiveness. It creates a sense of you do it just out of fear instead of doing it out of conviction. So it's much more powerful to give people a good motivation to change their behavior. It's much better if we can do things out of kindness and compassion rather than out of anger. So basically, anger doesn't work. It doesn't lead to the results we're trying to actually achieve. In the vast majority of cases in life, we get angry with things that are really out of control, right? And the classic example is a story from Ajahn Brahmali in Dori where he talks about a man who was angry at the traffic light, right? I don't know if you read that story. The story of this man who was hurrying along and he's going to a meeting or something and he gets into his car and he's short of time and he rushes off to this meeting and just as he comes around the corner, the traffic light goes red, just as he comes around the corner, right? And he gets so upset and angry. You terrible traffic light, you did this on purpose, just because you knew I was late for this meeting, you do this to annoy me, right? And this is anger in a nutshell. It's madness. You can't get angry with a traffic light. They're not going to respond to your anger. This is often what it's like. In most situations in the world are red traffic light situations. There are things, causes and conditions which make a situation happen in a certain way. And just like red traffic lights, we then get angry at these things, which basically just come about because of cause and conditions. So remember that. Things are red traffic lights in the world. People are red traffic lights, right? They do things not specifically to annoy you. They do things because of conditions and causes in their own life. They're red traffic lights. How can you get angry with a red traffic light? How can you get angry with this person? Right? So remember that. So these are the two ways. It doesn't work. People are red traffic lights, number 2. Number 3, remember that anger, when someone does something to you which is nice, remember it's not really personal. Right? We tend to take things personally. The reason why we get angry very often is because we think that they are doing it to us. Are they really doing it to you? Or is it because you happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time? What is actually going on? What is actually going on? Again, it goes back to it's actually that person's problem. They get angry because of all these influences on their life, not because they want to be angry, because all the cause and conditions come together at that particular point in time, and you happen to be there, so they do something bad, and then you get angry. It's not personal. It's got nothing to do with you. It's not because you are evil, or because there is some personal clash between you and the other person. So you happened to be there when all the conditions were such that this other person did something stupid. So remember that, it's never personal. And if you remember that it's never personal, there is much less reason for anger, right? It's the personal stuff that is difficult, but it isn't personal. So these are just some of the ways of overcoming anger. And if you can apply some of these things may work better for you than others, then I think we can all make a lot of inroads into this particular problem. Okay, so now I want to continue with a very different topic. So just to remind you very briefly, what I'm trying to do here is to give you strategies for overcoming the hindrances, overcoming the defilements of the mind. This is what this is about. So the first one is strategies how to overcome anger. And the next one I want to talk about now is contemplation of death is the main subject of the next one. And contemplation of death is something that you will find in many, many places in the Buddha's discourses. It is a very important teaching of the Buddhas, and for that reason it's actually something that basically is recommended to do. And the Buddha specifically says in the suttas that the contemplation of death is something that should be used by both monastics and also lay people, both by men and by women. So there's no distinction. It's a contemplation that is useful for everybody. And that is one of the reasons why I bring it up. And if it is practiced well, it is also, I think, a very effective way of overcoming the problems of the mind. So, let us see what the Buddha has to say about this. There's a little bit more than just the pure contemplation of death. There's a few more interesting things about this particular sutta. So this is the next sutta in your in the little thing here, and it's called Delicate. Okay, because I was delicately nurtured, most delicately nurtured, extremely delicately nurtured. At my father's residence, lotus ponds were made just for my enjoyment. In one of them, blue lotuses bloomed. In another, red lotuses. In a third, white lotuses. I used no sandalwood unless it came from Kasi. And my headdress, jacket, and lower garment and upper garment were made of cloth from Kasi. By day and by night a white canopy was held over me, so that cold and heat, dust and grass and dew would not settle on me. I had 3 mansions, one for the winter, one for the summer, and one for the rainy season. I spent the 4 months of the rains in the rainy season mansion, being entertained by musicians, none of whom were men, and I did not leave the mansion. While in other people's homes, slaves and workers and servants are given broken rice together with sour gruel for their meals. In my father's residence, they were given choice hill rice, meat, and boiled rice. So, here is the Buddha talking about his upbringing, and this is one of the very few discourses where you get a little bit of feeling for what the Buddha's upbringing was, what it was like. Later on, as Buddhism advances over the centuries, you have all the legends and the mythology about the Buddha being a prince, living in great splendor, and all these kind of things. But this is probably the closest we get to really seeing what the Buddha's life was like at that time. So this was what luxury meant in those days, right? He obviously had a very nice upbringing. He had lotus ponds. He used no sandalwood. Sandalwood from Kasi was like a luxury type of sandalwood. Kasi is Benares. If you go to India today, you go to Varanasi, that is where this is. And his clothes made of cloth from Kasi, from Benares. Has anybody here been to Varanasi? Anybody been? Yeah? Yes? Okay, yeah. And I've been there a couple of times. And one of the fascinating things when you come to Varanasi in Benares is that one of the first things that happens is that all these cloth merchants, they come out and they want to pull you to a side. That happened to me when you were there. Were you pulled aside by cloth merchants trying to sell cloth? That happened to me when I was there. And it's one of those things that even today, Benares is like a place in India where we buy cloth, right? So it is like the cloth place where we have like the best cloth in India. And that was the case at the time of the Buddha as well, right? Nothing has changed much in India for 2,500 years, which is quite reassuring in some way. And so this is, it's actually one of the nice things, because when you go to India, you try to make that connection between India at the time of the Buddha and India now, right? And you read the suttas and you see this particular connection. Cloth is still the cloth of Benares, just like it was at the time of the Buddha. You can see the connections there. And it kind of gives you the sense of authenticity, right? There's something real going on here. Anyway, so that is what the Buddha wore. He wore the classic cloth, which was the luxury cloth of those days. It had a white canopy held over him, so dust, etc., would not settle on him. And he had a different house for each season. Maybe mansion is a bit of an exaggeration, but maybe a house for each season. Things were quite simple in those days, and we keep that in mind. At the very end, we even have the idea of compassion in his household. So this was obviously one of the things that was suggested in a good household. We had compassion for everyone. We treated even the people at the lowest rungs of the social ladder, like the workers and slaves. We treated them well by giving them good food, right? And this was one of the characteristics of a good household. So the point here, the Buddha says, amid such splendor in a delicate life, that's what he says next. So the point here is to set the scene, right? And this is what the Buddha's life was like. And even though he had such a good life, but despite that, he still thought about the problems of life. Because next after this, we get into the Buddha reflecting about life, about illness, about old age, and about death. So again, it is regardless, it doesn't matter what kind of upbringing you have, what kind of background you have. These realities of life are equally applicable, of course, regardless where you come from. So the Buddha is kind of setting this up. And perhaps, if you have all the luxuries in life, perhaps death, perhaps illness is even more stark, because it's more of a contrast, right? You have a good life, and then the reality of life actually is quite removed from how your ordinary life, what it actually seems like. Okay. So, the Buddha says, amid such splendor in a delicate life, it occurred to me, an uninstructed worldling, though himself subject to old age, not exempt from old age, feels repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when he sees another who is old, overlooking his own situation. Now, I too am subject to old age, and not exempt from old age. Such being the case, if I were to feel repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when seeing another who is old, that would not be proper for me. When I reflected thus, my intoxication with youth was completely abandoned. So, the uninstructed worldling, the Putujana, the ordinary person in the world, someone who is not an Arya, someone who doesn't see the world as it actually is. Uninstructed means Asutava, he hasn't heard, she hasn't heard any good teachings. And such a person, even though they are subject to old age, you tend to feel humiliated, repelled, and disgusted when you see someone who is old. How do you feel when you see someone who is really, really old? Someone perhaps who is about to die, someone who is wasting away, right? Someone who is kind of crooked, bent over, they can't look after themselves properly. How do you feel when you see that? Do you feel it's fine? Or do you feel slightly kind of, it's not so nice to see them, it's kind of unpleasant? How do you feel? And I think many people feel the sense of being a little bit repelled when they see that. When someone is very, very old, falling apart, teeth are falling out, they can't see, saliva kind of dripping everywhere, you know. This is what happens when you get very old. You get completely out of control after a while. The body just doesn't function anymore. And you feel a sense of being repelled. And of course, the problem with feeling repelled that each one of us is going to have to go there, right? We're all going to have to be old one day. So is it right to feel repelled if it's already part of you? Old age is already inside of us. We're going to go there one day. It's already part of who we are. If you have been born, if you're young, old age also has to happen. So if it is part of you, if it's part of your person, part of your are as a human being, then how can you reasonably be humiliated? It's not being disgusted by yourself, right? It's not being repelled by yourself if you feel repelled by this. So the point is that we need to embrace these things. When we see somebody who's old, remember, you are of the same nature. One day, if you're unlucky, it won't happen to you, and you all want to become as old as possible so we have a chance to practice the Dhamma to the max. So it's not appropriate to be old, because that is you in the future, and you've also been there before. So when you think like that, you abandon the idea, you abandon being repelled by being old, and you see it just as nature, and you remember that you have the same nature. Very powerful reflection in its own right. And then, when you do that, you understand that it's appropriate to feel repelled, then the intoxication with being young disappears. And it is like, quite literally, like being intoxicated. What does it mean that we are intoxicated? It means like you're drunk, right? Intoxicated means being drunk. When you're drunk, what happens? What happens is that you forget how you're supposed to live, and you forget what is right and wrong, and you start doing stupid things that you wouldn't do if you were sober, right? This is the problem with intoxication. You don't see things clearly anymore. You get your priorities wrong. It's exactly the same thing. If we don't look at the world in the right way, if we see things in the wrong way, then we are like we're intoxicated. We don't understand that we're going to be old ourselves. We're intoxicated with you. It's almost like we have forgotten that this is part of us. We know it somehow way in the back of our mind, but it's not really clear to us. That's why we feel humiliated by this. And that's why we're intoxicated. And when we are intoxicated, it's like we're drunk, we do crazy things with our life, and we spend our life unwisely. So this is a way of becoming sober. It's a way of becoming clean. And it's useful to remember that, because sometimes we think that intoxication is all about drugs and alcohol, but it's about many other things as well. And one of those things is not having clarity about the nature of life. And that makes you clear, right? Your mind becomes clear. You become peaceful. You're no longer driven by this stupidity and delusion, and you know how you're supposed to live your life. Very useful. Okay. So you get rid of the intoxication of youth, and then you start to see things clearly. You become more peaceful, and you have less defilements as a consequence. Next one. And it occurred to me, an uninstructed worldling, though himself subject to illness, not exempt from illness, feels repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when he sees another who is ill, overlooking his own situation. I too am subject to illness, and not exempt from illness. Such being the case, if I were to feel repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when seeing another who is ill, that would not be proper for me. And when I reflected thus, my intoxication with health was completely abandoned. And again, when we see people who are really ill, really sick, maybe in the last stages of a bad illness like cancer or perhaps AIDS or something like that. And it's terrible when you see someone who's really, really ill. They are often very emaciated, very thin, and they look like a completely changed person. In Australia recently, they have started a campaign with tobacco advertising. When you are no longer allowed by I'm not sure if you read it out in the newspapers, you're no longer allowed to advertise the brand of your cigarettes on the... actually, you're allowed to have a very plain thing selling the brand, but you're no longer allowed to have any fancy packaging there. Because all the cigarette packaging in Australia now is kind of ugly, kind of the most terrible colour. It's true, the most terrible colour you can imagine. It looks really unappetizing. And then large writings, warning, right? Warning, large letters, and then saying this can endanger your life. And then a picture a terrible picture of someone who has cancer or someone who has some kind of terrible thing to show you what happens when you smoke, right? And this is kind of the new law. It's the first country in the world that imposed this thing they call plain packaging law, where you actually show what smoking cigarettes actually can lead to. And it's very powerful. Already people are quitting smoking in heat because it's just so painful to smoke, and we have to see these pictures every time. And what you see there, what is so fascinating, one of the things that they had there was a picture of a man before and after he got cancer, right? So before he was this handsome man, very nice, and afterwards he was absolutely terrible, completely emaciated, thin, just lying there. He had lung cancer. Lung cancer is a very bad form of cancer, and you're completely out of it. And you can see the terribleness, what kind of thing, that illness, when it's very bad, what it can do to you. So it's the same kind of thing again. So how do you feel when you see that? Are you equanimous with that? Are you okay with that? Or do you feel repelled by that? I think the majority of people who feel slightly repelled when they see that, it's very hard not to do so, because it is actually quite an unpleasant sight to see what the body actually can deteriorate to if you have the wrong kind of conditions. But again, it can happen to all of us, right? We're all subject to these illnesses. We're all subject to these problems. It's too easy to think it's not going to happen with me. It may happen with you. It may happen with me. I may have a cancer in my body right now. Who knows? Next time you see me, I may look terrible. Things may be completely changed. Right? You just don't know. And then, of course, once you realize that this is actually the reality, it takes away some of that intoxication of being healthy. You start to understand the world the way it actually is. You start to see life for what it actually is, the problems. And you gain clarity. When intoxication disappears, what happens instead? You have clarity of mind. So all of these things that drive you towards clarity, the desires and the angers and the ill will subside, and you have clarity instead. And of course, clarity means that you understand what is important in life, what you should be doing, and what you shouldn't be doing. So very, very beautiful. So that is old age and illness. And the next one is about contemplating death. And that is by far the most important one of these. But before I get onto that one, let us just take another 10-minute meditation break. old age and illness. And then the last one, the most important one of these, is death itself. And as I said before, it's a very important contemplation in the suttas. It's something that Buddha recommends many, many times over. So it's for that reason, obviously, it's very useful on the spiritual path. That's why, obviously, he gives this particular teaching. So let's see what he has to say about this. So again, it occurred to me, uninstructed worldling, though himself subject to death, not exempt from death, feels repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when he sees another who is dead, overlooking his own situation. Now I too am subject to death, and not exempt from death. Such being the case, if I were to feel repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when seeing another who is dead, that would not be proper for me. When I reflected thus, my intoxication with life was completely abandoned. So again, the idea that we get intoxicated, right? That you forget that you're going to die, you forget that life can end basically at any time. And because we forget that, we get intoxicated. We lose the clarity of mind, we lose the mindfulness, we lose our ability to be clear about what is truly important in life. And this idea of contemplating death, and to do this properly, the purpose behind this, remember, is to make it clear that you are going to die. Not only that you're going to die, that death very often comes at unexpected times. Suddenly it can come, you have no idea exactly when it's going to be there. And to be able to make this idea of death contemplation work, it's almost as if you have to make it real, that this actually can happen. You have to be clear that you actually can die at any time. You have to be clear that death there's always this uncertainty lingering around life, right? So you have to make it real, bring it into the present moment. And then when you do that, that is when it actually works. So, how do we do that then? How do we actually bring it into the present moment? How is it possible to actually have a real sense that we could die almost at any time? How do you make it real that you could die tomorrow, for example? Well, the first thing is that you have to feel comfortable about this. If it really freaks you out and you feel, oh, I could die tomorrow, I can't handle this. If you find it very, very hard, then don't do it. If you find that some people find it very hard, in that case, don't use this kind of reflection, because it's going to make it very difficult for you. But generally speaking, the idea of death is a very kind of spiritual thing. In almost all spiritual traditions, they use the reflection on death to kind of make yourself more mindful, basically, to bring yourself into the present moment, to remind yourself what is really important in life, to give rise to a sense of priorities, what actually we should be focusing on and what we shouldn't be focused on. So, how do we make it real? So remember, we could die tomorrow, right? How can you die tomorrow? Traffic accidents, right? The traffic in KL is really bad sometimes. You never know what could happen next. Lots of crazy drivers out there, right? I've seen a few of them myself already. So crazy drivers means that you're not really in charge. Somebody else, could do the stupid thing. That's it. Suddenly you had it, and it's all finished. You could have a heart attack, right? Anybody these days who read about people with heart attacks even when they're young, people in their 20s having heart attacks, let alone everyone else here, those of you who are over 30 or 40 or 50, as you go older, the chances are just increasing all the time. You could have a cancer in the body right now, we don't know. You could just walk outside and stumble and fall down and die on the spot. This happens sometimes, right? People die in the most strangest of ways. And all of these things are always possible. So remember that. And remember that one day is going to be your last day. One day, maybe just like today, is going to be your last day. And if you're not ready now, when are you going to be ready? If you're not ready now, you're not going to be ready when it actually happens, because the only time you can be ready is now. So now is the time to be ready if you're going to die tomorrow. So remember that and make it very real that today actually can be the last day. And then see what happens inside of you. Use this contemplation when you are on a meditation retreat or when you are at home and you're feeling a bit restless or agitated or whatever. That is often a good time to use this kind of contemplation. If you're feeling restless and agitated, it's very hard to watch the breath, it's very hard to be peaceful. This kind of contemplation can become very, very powerful in this kind of situation. Or it can be very useful to remind yourselves of the priorities in life, what actually is important. To give you an example of that, many years ago I was in Brisbane, in Australia. Brisbane is the opposite side of Australia from Perth, and I was visiting a monastery over there, and one of the people who came to the monastery was a Sri Lankan man. He was getting a bit old, maybe he was around 60 or something like that, and he told me that he did the death contemplation every day. And the way he did it was that when he left his home in the morning, he would remind himself, I could die today, and because I could die today, I have to say a proper goodbye to my family. I cannot leave my household, my wife and my children in a state of anger and negativity. I always have to make sure that I say goodbye in a proper way before I go, because I might not be back to be able to rectify any problem that is caused, right? And that is how he used the death contemplation. It puts things in perspective, gives clarity about priorities in life. So these are the two ways of using death contemplation. You can use it in your meditation practice when you feel restless, to calm you down, to make you feel peaceful. And you can use it in daily life to remind yourself of the things that are truly important, that truly matter. You could die, so you cannot afford to do the wrong thing. You cannot afford to get angry and upset, because you may never be able to rectify it afterwards. So what happens when you do death contemplation? Now try it yourself and see what happens in your own mind when you actually make it real that you could die tomorrow. Try it out and see what happens. Okay, I could die tomorrow, right? Don't try it now, sitting in here. Try it out by yourself when you are walking by yourself or something like that. And see what happens in your mind. And what happens in me when I do this reflection? Not every time, it doesn't always work, but when it works, what happens with me is that you can see the desires and any kind of negativity in the mind starts to disappear. If I could die in a few hours, and the closer we can bring the death to the present moment, the more powerful it is. The Buddha said that ideally we should bring it into the very next breath, as if we can die on the next breath. And if you can die on the next breath, if you might die in a few hours' time, or even tomorrow, what happens then? Imagine yourself on your deathbed, right? This is the end. You're not going to come out of your deathbed anymore. What is going to happen then? What is your reaction going to be if somebody comes into the room and they want to argue with you? Are you going to argue back if you're dying? You're not going to argue back, right? There's no point in arguing anymore. You're out of here. You're moving on. This world is finished as far as you're concerned. You're moving on to the next stage of your life. This world is irrelevant. You couldn't care less if they want to argue with you. You're not going to argue back. This world is finished. If they want to argue, it's their problem. You're out of here. Are you going to have lots of desires if you're about to die? Are you going to think about the next house you're going to build? Are you going to think about the next car you're going to purchase, the next relationship you're going to get into? You're dying, right? You've got nothing to do with this world anymore. And the desires that relate to this world are irrelevant. It's all finished. It's all past. So this is what happens. You don't want to get angry. You don't want to get angry. You don't have any desires anymore. Because anger and desires are all related to the conditions in this life, of this world. And you're out of here. You're moving on. You're finished with this world. So you become peaceful. And this is what you find. You find that wise people, when they die, they become peaceful on the deathbed. Have you seen that happen before? People who die, they actually often, if they're wise, they become peaceful. And they just smile. And you can see that they're basically finished with this world. And that peacefulness that the dying have on the deathbed, that peacefulness we want to bring into our life right here and right now. Instead of waiting till you're actually dying, you want to make it real now, here and now, at this very moment. What difference does it make if you're going to die in 2 hours, or if you're going to die maybe in a few days or a few months, right? It's very, very short anyway. It happens so fast. and you don't know when it's going to happen. So now is the time to have that peace of a dying person. Now is the time to bring it into your life. This is the power of the death contemplation. It makes this world seem so finished with this world. No desire, no anger anymore. And I told this before in a few places. I quite like this. A while ago, when I last visited my parents in Norway, I was speaking to my father about this, about death contemplation, because he's getting a bit interested in Buddhism now, as I was saying the other day. And we were talking about death contemplation. He was saying to me, he's now in his mid-70s, right, getting quite old, realizing that life is kind of moving towards its end fairly fast. He recognizes that. And he says to me that, all the things in this. My father was quite a successful man. He was successful in business. He, made quite a lot of money, and he had climbed the sort of the hierarchy in business to the very top. And he did a lot of things in life. Generally speaking, he was a successful man. But now he says to me, he looks back on all these things, and he says, so what? So what if I made that money? So what if I had a good career? So what if I had all these things in life that everybody dreams about? It's become irrelevant. I'm moving on. All this stuff belongs to this world, and I'm out of this world. I'm going to the next one. Who cares about all the things that belong to this world, right? So you can see here, once you become old, you start to realize that all the things that seem so important when we're young. I know what I was like when I was young. It was like, career, I've got to get an education, I'm going to make money, and all this kind of things when I was in my teens or whatever, right? It all seems so important. When you come to the end of your life, you realize it's just a massive illusion, and all of it seems completely ridiculous, because now you have to leave it all behind. Everything belongs to this world, and you're moving on to the future world, in the future life. So it changes your priorities, it changes your view of life, it changes your priorities. Suddenly you realize what actually really matters, what actually really counts in this world. And of course, what counts in this world is not what we do, it's not what education we have, what career we have, what kind of, even what kind of partners or family or friends we have. All of those things are not so important. What matters is how we do those things. Do we do it with kindness? Do we do it with compassion? Do we do it with wisdom? That is what really matters, right? And that is what you start to understand when you come to the end of your life. Because that kindness, that compassion, that wisdom that you develop throughout your life, if you practice your business properly, if you live with your family in a good way, that is what remains. That is still in your mind when you die. And that is what you have built up through a lifetime. That is what you take with you into the future. And that is a very large part of what we mean by karma, is this mind that you take with you from one life into the next one. And then you feel on your deathbed, you feel, wow, I've spent my life well, right? I've done something worthwhile. Instead of focusing on the quantity, on the size of your house, or the size of your bank account, or the kind of the social climbing you have done, and the social sphere in which you kind of move, and all these kind of things. Instead, you focus on the compassion, the goodness in your life, the good times when you were kind, when you did the right thing. That is what matters when you're about to die. So the death idea changes your priorities. It puts away the desires and the angers in this world, and makes you clear, it clarifies your mind, and then makes you ready for meditation practice if you want to meditate. This is the power of death contemplation. So very, very useful. But like everything else in Buddhism, it takes a lot of practice, right, to get this right. It's not something that necessarily works straight away. For some people it can work straight away. For other people you need to practice it, to think about this, to learn how to use this. And as you learn, it becomes a force that you can use in your life, a force to achieve all these positive things I've just been talking about. So, that is the death contemplation. The intoxication, again, of life is abandoned, and you feel peaceful instead, and you understand what is really important. And then the Buddha goes on. I'm not sure if this is a separate sutta or the same one, but here it is attached to this one, so we'll just assume it's the same one there. There are, bhikkhus, these three kinds of intoxication. What three? Intoxication with youth, with health, and with life. An uninstructed worldling, intoxicated with youth, engages in misconduct by body, speech, and mind. With the breakup of the body after death, he is reborn in the plane of misery, in a bad destination in the lower world. The uninstructed worldling, intoxicated with health, engages in misconduct by body, speech, and mind. With the breakup of the body, that person too is reborn in the plane of misery. An uninstructed worldling, intoxicated with life, engages in misconduct by body, speech, and mind. With the breakup of the body after death, they are reborn in the plane of misery, in a bad destination, in the lower world, in hell. In other words, you are intoxicated, you don't know what you're doing. You are losing the plot and you start doing things which lead to suffering for yourself and others in the future. And then last one here, which is interesting again. Intoxicated with youth, a bhikkhu gives up the training and reverts to the lower life. Intoxicated with health, he gives up the training and reverts to the lower life. And intoxicated with life, he gives up the training and reverts to the lower life. So, it is also a kind of protection. If you are a monastic and you have confidence in the Buddhist path of practice, and this protects you against being intoxicated and losing the plot and then returning to lay life as a consequence. So, very useful again. So, there you are. So that is the death contemplation for you. It's actually good that we are okay. So, let's just do a little bit of meditation again. And I will do it. I don't have that many questions here. We can do a little bit more sutta before I move on to the question. People happy with that? That makes sense? Yeah? So we'll do that. And then just do a bit of meditation and come back to a little bit more sutta reading. And then we'll do the Q&A in about half an hour or so. do that. Okay, so then the next sutta here is called "Born from Those Who Are Dear." And it's not one of the most important suttas that I wanted to go through on this retreat, so I'm just going to tell you basically the content of the sutta in 5 minutes, and then you can have a read of the sutta itself. It's a very charming little sutta, there's a lot of nice little things in this one. There's more like a story, and there is the actual content, Dhamma content, is in fact great. So basically this is a story of King Pasenadi. King Pasenadi was one of the great supporters of the Buddha at that time, and he had a wife called Malika. And Malika was a disciple of the Buddha, and the rumor arrived in the palace because he was a king, and this rumor was that the Buddha had said that sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair arises from those who are dear, is born from people who are dear. So this rumor arose in the palace, the Buddha had said this. And then Malika said, well, if the Buddha said that, it must be true. And then the king gets really upset because she's listening more to the Buddha than she's listening to him. So it's one of those things. And then Malika, being a very wise woman, she decides to find out whether this is true, and then to get the king around to actually become a disciple of the Buddha himself. And she's able to do this, being very wise. She sends somebody off to the Buddha and asks him whether this actually is the case, that he has said this. And then the Buddha points out that, of course, when people who are dear to us, when they die, when they become ill or whatever, we feel sad, right? And because of that, it's the case that when sadness and grief arises from people who are dear and who are close to us. And then she brings that information back to the palace, and she tells it to the king, and then the king says, wow, how profound, isn't that wonderful? Of course, he is right? We always think about family members and people around us as people who bring us happiness and pleasure, right? It is always a flip side of the coin, because when they bring us happiness and pleasure, when they disappear, when they die, when they get ill, the suffering is all the greater because of that. And this is one of those insights. It's amazing sometimes that it takes a Buddha to point these things out. In a sense, it's so obvious, but also it's something we don't really want to know, because it can have like a kind of a dampening effect, if you like, on our relationships, right? If we know that it's going to give rise to suffering. So this is basically what that sutta is about, just showing us that even relationships, even the most important happinesses in our lives, the people around us, there is a downside. There is the potential is always there at any time for suffering to come out of this as a consequence of that relationship. And it's a very useful reminder. It doesn't mean that we don't care anymore. It doesn't mean that we don't have relationships. It just means that we are a little bit wiser about how we have relationships. We don't attach quite so much because we understand that one day it must come to an end. Even if we have the best relationship in the world, or maybe particularly then if we have the best relationships in the world, we know that it must end in problems at some stage. Okay, I think I better get on with these questions now because it's hiding out very fast. I think I have to hide the basket or something. So that is what that sutta is about. So please have a read it for yourself, and I think you might enjoy it. It's a nice little sutta. Just before I go on to the questions, just to remind you what we are doing here. All of this actually a theme here. It may seem to you I'm doing all this random stuff, reading out random suttas, and just, what is the connection between all of these things? And remember that what I'm trying to do here is to show you ways of purifying yourself, right? How can we purify the mind? This is the connection between the death recollection, between the how to overcome anger and resentment in life, and also the idea of remembering that even people who are dear to us, often it leads to problems because of our attachments and our craving. for people who are close to us. So all of this is geared towards the same thing, overcoming desire, and in particular, overcoming anger, ill will, and resentment. This is the most important thing. This is what all this is about. And if you deal with these things in the right way, definitely it will help to move you in this direction. And then you are practicing on this Buddhist path. You're doing the gradual training. You're using the wisdom practice to move you onwards in the gradual training. Okay, so that is all the sutras for today. And then we will continue tomorrow as we move along. And tomorrow we're going to look a little bit more on sense pleasures and then on some wisdom practices afterwards. But now let us move on to the questions. It's always a nice sign when people have questions. It means that people have been awake and have been following and know what's going on, and they have an interest in what's happening. So it's great to have so many questions coming in. Okay, so I'll start deep down here. Okay. Dear Ajahn, kindly elaborate on the meaning of this. I seek refuge in the Buddha, in the Dhamma, and in the Sangha. What does it mean to take the triple gem as your refuge? What is the point behind this? It's a good question, and I think it's an important one because we do this all the time, right? We bow down to the Buddha and say to take refuge. It's handy to know why we're doing this. So the point of this is because of whatever reason we have a certain confidence in the Buddha's teachings, right? Because you read some sutras or you have understood a little bit about the teaching of the Buddha, you understand that this actually relates directly to your life. It has the potential for doing something good for your life, to increase your happiness if you like it, and to decrease the suffering in life. And because you have that confidence in this teaching and this ability to do something for you, it means that whenever you have a problem in life, it's like you have a resource, you have a place you can go to help you out. So if you have a problem, instead of going different places, you can actually go to the Dhamma and try to figure out how to resolve issues, how to resolve problems, how to move forward in the spiritual practice, how to have more happiness and less suffering in life. So you have a place. It's like a refuge. It's a place you can go to sort things out in your life. That is basically what refuge is. It means you have this thing which is always available to you, always there to support you in your practice and in your life. That's essentially how I understand it and what it comes down to. Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, the Buddha because he is an originator of the path, the Dhamma because it is the actual teaching that he teaches, and the Sangha because this is again what I was talking about before. The idea of Sangha is those people who actually have realized the Dhamma, right? Those people where the practice kind of shines through and you can see the qualities that the Buddha is talking about. You can see them in real life. That is the idea of Sangha. So that is how we get, this is the meaning of this idea of refuge then. Yes? No? Maybe? Perhaps? Yes? Okay? Yeah? Good then. So if you're not happy with what I say, you can, please ask again, or you can, I don't know the question in the basket, or whatever you like to do. Okay. So, next one. Okay, sometimes I find it difficult to feel compassion for some downright distasteful characters. Isn't it easy to ignore them altogether? The Buddha said to leave alone the untamable people. Yeah, you can ignore them if you don't have to deal with them. You can ignore them, right? If these are people that have got nothing to do with you anyway, just ignore them. Pretend they don't exist, and you'll be fine. But of course, sometimes we can't ignore those people, right? Because sometimes they're too much in your face, and when they really are in your face, then you have to do something to overcome any anger you may have. That's when compassion comes in handy. Remember that even the most distasteful characters, they're also human beings, right? They also want to be happy. They also suffer. They are sometimes we forget that people who are different from us also are human, but they want to be happy. And when you remember that they want to be happy, but they're probably creating enormous amounts of suffering for themselves. It isn't that hard to have compassion for them. So remember that. One of the problems in our world, it's getting less of a problem now because the world is getting smaller and we all know each other very well. But in the old days, not so long ago, the world was very divided, right? Kind of, some people lived in the West, some people lived in Asia, some people lived in Africa, kind of far apart. And everybody who was kind of different was looked upon with great suspicion, right? Okay, we're not sure about these people. But now the world is smaller. And you get to see people of all kind of backgrounds, and you start to understand. Slowly it dawns on you. We're all in the same boat. We all got the same problems. We all have the same aspirations in life. We all want to avoid suffering. We all want to be happy. The human condition is the same. It doesn't matter where you're born, which country, what culture you come from. The human condition is the same for all of us. And this, I find, is a beautiful thing about the Buddha's teaching. It's precisely that a person who lived 2,500 years ago in India, right? India is also quite far from the culture in Malaysia, it's quite far from the Western culture, and yet that person is able to speak to people 2,500 years later on from completely different cultures. And when you read it, it's like, wow, this is true, right? He understands what is going on in our minds. He understands what's going on in our lives. And it shows you the universality of the human condition. We all have the same aspirations, the same things that we're trying to achieve. So remember that, even the distasteful characters, right? Downright distasteful, as you put it, they too are humans. They too want to be happy. So be careful not to get too negative in your perceptions, because it's going to affect you badly if you are too negative. Try to have some understanding. It doesn't mean that you condone their actions or say that what they're doing is right. Not at all. What it means is that you understand what it is like to be human, basically. Okay. Okay. Many questions in one? Okay. Right, okay, so I would be most grateful if you could comment on the concept of duality and non-duality. Thank you. Okay, duality and non-duality. Duality just means that there are many things happening, right? If there's more than one thing happening, there is duality. Duality means contrast. It means opposing things, opposing forces. Dark and light is a duality. Good and bad is a duality. Man and woman is a duality. They're contrasts, right? Malaysia and Singapore is a duality. New Zealand and Australia is a duality. Whenever there is a contrast, two things contrasting with each other, then there is duality. It's funny how we all have our pet kind of, nations that we kind of, rub up against. I know Malaysia, Singapore, in Australia it's New Zealand, in Norway it's Sweden, right? It's always the neighbor for some reason. It's always the neighbor where there's that duality, let's say. So this is duality. Whenever there is differences, whenever there are things that separate us. Non-duality is when there is unity, when there isn't that separation anymore. And the real non-duality can only happen in very profound meditation experience. The real non-duality, even when you start to meditation goes deeper, there's still often the duality of object and subject. The sense that you are here and the thing you are watching in meditation is over there, right? This is the duality of meditation practice. But as you get more and more peaceful, as you go deeper and deeper in your meditation, the sense of diversity, the sense of manifoldness becomes less and less. Things unify more and more. There's less and less duality there, less and less manifoldness there. And when you go deep enough in meditation, duality ceases altogether, and there's only unity left. There's only one experience. There's no sense of experiencer over here, an object over there. It's like object and experiencer merge into one. And there's only one thing left, and that is true non-duality. So this is the non-duality from the kind of meditation point of view, as it is explained in the suttas. It's called ekatta. Ekatta quite literally means oneness. It's found in the suttas. Everything is just one. There's just one experience, and no sense of there being any separation in that experience. And that is why, in the very deep state of meditation, we cannot think, right? Thinking by its very nature is duality there. Because you're thinking about something, there's a movement, there's one thing contrasting with something else. But there's absolutely no duality, no contrast. Thinking is impossible. Right? All that is left is this particular one experience and nothing else. Non-duality. Right? That is the duality and non-duality from the sutta, early sutta point of view. Okay. From the same person, we have another question. I would be most grateful if you may elaborate on the view that there is no bodhisattva path. Thank you. Okay? I'm not sure if it's always a bit dangerous. This is just, again, please take these as my opinions, as the way I view the Buddhist teachings. When I say that there is no bodhisattva path, I'm saying that from the perspective of the early Buddhist suttas, right? The perspective of what I consider to be the authentic word of the Buddha. That's basically the perspective I'm taking. From a Mahayana perspective, there is a bodhisattva path, but that is, as far as I'm concerned, I think almost all scholars agree with that these days. It's not actually the word of the Buddha. And I am really just interested in the word of the Buddha, because he is the originator of the whole of Buddhism. So he must have got it right. If he didn't get it right, basically there is no Buddhism. That's why I'm interested in that word, the word of the Buddha. And it is very clear that the Buddha did not teach a bodhisattva path. There's no such thing in the suttas. The Buddha didn't say that he had to practice over many eons to become a Buddha. That is a later idea you find in the commentaries. The Buddha himself, rather, it's almost like he stumbles across this, right? Remember that the Buddha himself, he had to practice for years and years, doing all kinds of austerities. What does that mean? It means that he didn't really understand what he was doing, right? He didn't know where the true path was. He basically got it wrong. And only after getting it wrong for many, many years, and then he thinks back and thinks, wait a minute, I've taken this as far as it goes, and it does lead to enlightenment. That's what it says, right? So then he changes his mind, and then he moves on and practices deep meditation instead. And that then takes him to awakening. And elsewhere in the suttas, he specifically says, I had wrong view, right? He specifically says, I had wrong view. So if he has wrong view, it means he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know what the path is. And this is the whole point. As long as there is wrong view inside of you, and that wrong view is there, if there's no Buddha in the world, there has to be a wrong view. There's nobody to show you the way. And because of what you do with yourself, you're not awakening yourself, but there will have to be wrong view. And because there is wrong view, it means that you are practicing, by definition, wrongly, and occasionally getting it right, occasionally getting it wrong. And that's why I say that there is no bodhisattva path, because you can't actually see what you're doing. Yes? So I hope that kind of makes sense. There's only an arahant path. Bodhisattva, becoming a Buddha happens more or less by almost like by accident, by trial and failure, and then you happen to become a Buddha. So that's why it is much more dicey. Okay, let us move on to the next one. Okay, dear Ajahn, when a cancer patient just out of surgery felt full of pain of anger, is it because he or she fears death? How can we assist or say to him or her in order to overcome the fear? Thank you. Yeah, well, sometimes it is difficult, right? If somebody is full of anger and pain just after coming out of surgery, it probably means that they haven't really been able to deal with death in a very good way, right? They really haven't been able to come to terms with it. And that's probably the problem there. So, what can you do to help people overcome the fear of death and actually take it more in a wise way? Often what you have to do, and I think the most important thing that we can do for people is often just to be around, just to be kind, right? And just to be good to them, so they can feel at ease, they can feel relaxed. Often that is all we can do, because most people in the world, they crave kindness, they crave compassion, and when people get kindness, it often opens up their hearts, because when they feel kind, they feel secure, they feel secure in the world. When you feel secure, you're able to open up, you're able to look at the world in a new way. If you feel that people are against you, if you feel that people are trying to convert you or change you, instead of opening up, you close up and you become defensive, and you have even less of an ability to open up to the teaching of the Buddha or to the Dhamma. So the most important thing often is just to be able to be kind, to be able to be compassionate, to be there for them when they need us. And then there is a chance they will open up and listen to some profound teachings, such as the teachings of the Buddha, and trying to understand death in a different way. So I think this is often the best we can do. Just be kind. And don't ever have any expectations, right? Don't think that you're going to convert them. Don't think that you're going to be able to help them. Just care. Just be kind. I know there's a beautiful thing that Ajahn always says when there's doctors around. Are there any doctors here now? No? Okay. There is at least one psychologist there. But when there are doctors around, because doctors often are under pressure to save people, right? To cure people is often the pressure they're under. And they often get perhaps a bad mark in the book if somebody dies when they are supposed to be in charge of this person. But Ajahn says you cannot do that. You cannot have a culture where you have to cure. Because you can never be assured whether somebody can be cured or not. Many people have illness that cannot be cured. And if your job, if you think that you are duty bound to cure somebody, you're going to be frustrated. It's not going to work. It's impossible. So your job as a doctor, as Ajahn always says, is you should care. Caring is what you should be able to do. Because you can always care. Care always works. And then, if you try to care someone rather than cure, it means that they will feel at ease, they will be relaxed, and they will be able to die in a peaceful way, rather than being dying when you're under pressure to curing someone. If the doctor is under pressure to cure you, he will get frantic when you're dying, right? Pump you full of all kind of medicines and try to... It's impossible to have a peaceful death when somebody's frantically running around trying to cure you, right? So care is more powerful. And this is what you have to do with a person like this. Just care. Then see what happens. Have no expectations. Don't expect them to come around. And then there is a chance they will be able to listen to what you have to say. Maybe you will have some success. It's difficult, isn't it? Not to be kind, but never have an expectation. It's not easy, but that is the way to move forward. Okay. Next one. Okay. May I have permission to post recordings of the Sutta workshop on YouTube? Takk is Norwegian for thank you. That's amazing. How on earth do you know that? Is that okay? Any Norwegians here? No. Okay. Yeah, no, sure you can. No problems at all. I'm used to being on YouTube because of the recordings of the Buddhist Society. I'm on YouTube all the time, so I might as well be a bit more on YouTube and so it can make any difference. So please do so. Okay. Bhante, is it good or is it wrong to read suttas or Dhamma text while lying down and not in an upright position? Nah, it's okay, you can lie down, you can stand on your head, you can do whatever you like. Remember that the purpose here is to, sometimes we have too many kind of rituals about what is right and what is wrong, right? What matters is that you feel comfortable and that you feel that you can understand the text in a good way. That is the purpose. You read the suttas for understanding. You don't read the suttas for anything else. So just be respectful, right? Sometimes they say you shouldn't take Dhamma books to the toilet. That probably is a good idea, but maybe going a bit too far. But even that is actually not wrong as long as you are just taking aboard the Dhamma, right? If you're a very busy person and the only place you have time, every time you have place time to really sit as a toilet, take it to the toilet as well. It's okay. It's about why we do things. You're not being disrespectful, you just want to learn the Dhamma, right? So there's no problem there whatsoever. Please lie down. Okay. Okay, dear Ajahn, at the first Sutta teaching this morning, it says one can leave the householder's life at a later time in one's life. My question is there an age limit to enter the monastic life, since with age our bodies are as healthy and quick to learn and adapt to monastic life? Thank you. There is no real age limit, but it is true it is more difficult as you get older. There is a sutta which actually about the disadvantages of ordaining when you're old. And one of the problems is that you're much more entrenched in your ways and views when you get old, right? You kind of come to the last stage of life, not as flexible anymore as when you were younger. And then you come to the monastery and you are 60. I was actually one that I was at the Dharma the other day with it was a very nice Dharma, and the person who invited me to this Dharma, he said, it was very beautiful actually, he said when he was 60 years old, he went to become a samanera with Dhammananda at the Brickfields Vihara. 60 years old, right? And he told me that the reason why it was so nice is because it enables you, even when you're 60, to let go of your pride a little bit and just do the ordinary duties and to be told by all the young monks what to do, right? It's difficult if you're a grandfather and now all the young people tell you what to do. Not so easy. So I was very impressed. I thought, wow, here is someone who really understands the Buddha's teachings. He's 60 years old and is willing to let go of that pride and just do what the young people say. Isn't that a beautiful thing? But this is actually quite hard when you get older. And this is one of the difficulties of ordaining when you get older. There's certainly all these rules you have never kept in your life, and now you have to keep them. Not so easy. I see we have a few older monks in our monastery. They're very young in monastic years, but old in human years. And sometimes I say, these rules, they're not so important, And I say, yeah, all right. Whatever. And I realize that it's difficult for them, precisely because they're old, and they're stuck to certain ways of doing things. So I say, it's much better to ordain when you're still young. You get much more out of the monastic life. But if you do wish to ordain when you're old, please, it's still a wonderful thing to do. Try it out, come to the monastery for a while, see how it goes, see if you are still able to do it. And if you are, you will always be welcome to ordain, certainly at our monastery in certain time. If you can't get through the massive queue, we have an enormous queue of people who want to ordain, that's the only problem. Yes?
Venerable Sir, do the person who's 60 or whatever still have to ask for permission from his parents?
Usually, well, there is actually no exception to that, but normally when you're 60, your parents are not normally around anymore, right? So that's not a major issue. So unless you have psychic powers or something, you don't have to do that. Yeah. The older you are, the less important these things are, because it's basically understood that you are independent when you get to that age. Even in our monastery, if parents are very, very difficult and very obstinate and very hard, sometimes, the teacher will say, okay, you don't have to get the permission of your parents, you can still ordain sometimes. Because sometimes parents can be stupid as well, right? This happens. Okay. Okay, so this is the next question. How can we be sure that we have entered stream entry? Is the full understanding of comprehension of right view the most important criteria to be a stream enterer? It is, in a sense, that right view is indeed the most important criteria. It is the way you look at the world certainly changes, and everything gets turned upside down. You look at the world very differently from how you saw it before. Usually, if you attend stream entry, it's something really massive, right? It's like it's like your whole life is suddenly changed. You have seen something which is very, very profound and very deep. It's not like it's going to pass you by. I wonder, was that stream entry? If that's the case, you're on stream entry, right? It's, wow, something happened. That might be more like the reaction, right? This is very, very life-changing. And it's like, for many days afterward, many weeks afterwards, it's like no defilements, you're completely pure, and something has completely changed. And the most important thing that you see, the most important idea of the right view of stream entry, is that you have seen non-self to the very core. You understand that there is no self in a human being. You understand the emptiness inside. This is the most important aspect. And this, again, this also is a gradual thing, right? When you go deeper and deeper in meditation, it may feel sometimes like you become a stream entry, because in deep meditation, there's very little self left in deep meditation. So as you go deeper in meditation, you're actually leaving the sense of self behind, gradually, stage by stage. And this is why, one of the reasons why it is so useful to attain deep stages of meditation, because you're actually approaching the stage of stream entry. And that's why deep meditation, again, one of the reasons why deep meditation can be such an important trigger for attaining stream entry, because you're moving in the same direction. But the actual event is like a very powerful event, right? Wow! It says in the Suttas that the place where you attain stream entry is a place you should always remember in your life. In other words, you can't forget it. It's not an experience you can forget. It's something very, very powerful. But even a state of samadhi, even a state of deep meditation is very powerful. Someone who attains a jhana experience will never forget that experience in their entire life. That's how powerful it is. Jhanas are incredibly powerful experiences. So when you hear people say, yeah, I attained jhana, such and such, yeah, no, yeah, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, right? These are very, very deep and profound things. So the best thing to do, if you think you are a stream entry, be careful, be humble, don't be too sure about yourself. Go and talk to a competent teacher, go and speak to, I don't know who you take as a teacher, maybe speak to somebody like Ajahn Brahmali or some other competent teacher, and then try to find out what is actually going on. Okay, dear Ajahn, has the Lord Buddha been angry? Any recorded incident in the Sutta? Thanks so much for your valuable teachings of the Suttas. Did the Lord Buddha was he ever angry? Okay, I hope not, because if he was angry, it means he wasn't awakened, right? So that becomes a bit problematic. If he wasn't awakened, then we have grounds for doubting all the Suttas and everything. So I hope there is no record of the Buddha being angry anywhere, because it sort of takes away from everything. But sometimes the Buddha could be a bit firm, right? Sometimes he could say things that seem maybe a little bit tough, and it could be tough on people. And that is certainly recorded in the Sutta. So we have to distinguish a little bit about being firm from being angry. It's possible to be kind of assertive and firm in things without actually anger being behind it. And this is important. So even the Buddha, for example, he would lay down rules for the monks, right? He would say, you can't do these things. That's being firm, right? Sorry, you can't eat in the afternoon. But I'm hungry in the afternoon. No, you cannot eat in the afternoon. That's being firm. And there's lots of rules like that which stop you from doing all the things that you would like to do. So that is firmness. Okay. Okay, so I see, for instance, in this temple, a variety of images being displayed as worship figures together with the Lord Buddha. Please enlighten us what the Dhamma Sutta has to say about this coexistence. Okay, which figures are we talking about in particular? I'm not sure now. I haven't really looked very carefully myself. Well, I think maybe Buddha, Maitreya, that sort of things, perhaps. Okay, so basically what the Buddha says about worshipping figures, what he says is that any kind of worship of physical body is basically not according to the Buddha's teachings. There's a very famous sutta somewhere where there's a monk who is very ill and is about to die, And they sent out a messenger and said, oh, I would like to see the Buddha before I die. So the Buddha comes to see him, and then the Buddha says, well, here I am. So, is there a problem? Are you feeling remorseful about something? Is that why you want to see me? And he says, no, I don't feel remorseful about anything, Okay, is there a problem with your virtue, your conduct that you want to confess? No, I have no problem with my virtue or conduct. Okay, why don't you want to see me? Oh, I needed just to see you, to put my eyes on your body, right, before I pass away. And then the Buddha says, why do you want to see this putrid body here? The person who sees the Dhamma is the one who sees the Buddha. The one who sees the Buddha is the one who sees the Dhamma. You don't understand the Buddha by seeing the physical body. The way you understand the Buddha is by seeing the qualities that make up the Buddha. That is what it means to be a Buddha, right? So seeing the Dhamma is actually understanding those qualities. So in our world, we tend to, worship too much. We tend to worship relics and Buddha statues and all these kind of things. And it's not really wrong, but it's only wrong when it comes and moves into superstition. So remember why you're doing this. Why are we bowing down to a Buddha statue? We bow down to what it represents. The one who sees the Dhamma sees the Buddha. So are you seeing the Dhamma when you bow down to the Buddha statue? Or are you seeing the Buddha statue? What are you seeing? Are you bowing down to the qualities of compassion, wisdom, peace, kindness, etc., etc.? Is that what you're bowing down to? Why are you doing so kind of blindly without any kind of real feeling for what you're doing? Often we bow a bit too much, so we forget why you're bowing. But remember that, this is what you're bowing down to, right? See the Buddha in your mind. What is it? What are you actually worshipping? What are you actually bowing down to? What are you respecting? You're respecting the qualities that make up the Buddha. So this is what we should be doing. There's nothing really wrong with worshipping anything at all, as long as you remember that what you actually are respecting is the qualities behind that, right? Somebody asked the other day about Kuan Yin, should we worship Kuan Yin or not? If you think about Kuan Yin as compassion, as mercy, as goodness and kindness, and you bow down to that, there's nothing wrong with bowing down to a Kuan Yin statue if you want. The point is, it's not really Kuan Yin, it's the qualities that you bow down to. It's a beautiful thing, isn't it, to bow down to, have humility in the face of such beautiful qualities. I find it very nice. And it's real. This is the real respect where we should have real respect towards it. Okay, so we are coming to an end of the questions. Oh, okay. So I thought after this one there was 4 questions in one. Okay, good. Well, that's good. So the first one. Okay, so does right view established before hearing the Dhamma or after hearing the Dhamma? Is it possible to have right view before hearing the Dhamma for a lay person? It depends what you mean by right view, right? Right view is there's many different facets to right view. But the highest kind of right view is the right view of the Aryan person, of the stream enterer. That is the highest kind of right view. That kind of right view can only be had after deep insight, deep understanding of the teachings. And it can really only be had after learning something about Buddhism, one way or another. If you don't know anything about it, you can't really have that kind of right view, unless perhaps you are a Pacheka Buddha or something like that. Which means like an independent Buddha. But right view in a more kind of general sense, meaning ideas about rebirth perhaps, or about karma, ideas about whether the Buddha was awakened or not, ideas about whether you should look after your parents, and these things. You can have that to a greater or lesser extent, without perhaps having it fully. So anytime we do an act of kindness, if you understand the importance of kindness, it's already a little act of right view, right? You have a little right view because you think kindness is good. So kindness, that is already a starting point. If If you already have an idea of rebirth and being a Buddhist, that's already, from a Buddhist point of view, an idea of right view. If you have an understanding of karma, even if you're not a Buddhist, again, so it is possible to have a little bit of it, but you won't have the full right view. So people will vary enormously to the extent that they have right view, and we're all kind of somewhere in between, right, more or less close to the full right view. If we read the precept with good intention, do we still get black karma or grey karma? Okay? Black karma sounds pretty brown, doesn't it? We don't want to have too much of that. So, if you really have good intentions, if your intentions are pure, you will have good karma as a result. Pure intention always leads to good karma as a result. So it depends on how good your intention is. Even intention is often a little bit mixed up, right? It is reasonably good, but perhaps there is some negativity there. What is a good example of mixed intentions? I'm starting to feel really tired now, it's been a long day. What is a good example of a kind of mixed? Almost everything we do is mixed karma, right? For example, a mother who steals something because her child is hungry, the child might die. And then she steals something to feed her child with intention of giving it back later on, right? Or maybe not even with intention of giving it back, but just because she's desperate, because her little child is about to die. So what kind of karma is that? Well, she is compassionate, right, towards her child. She wants to help a starving child. And yet she obviously does an act of stealing, right? So that is what kind of greyish karma, when you're actually trying to do something which is kind, but you're doing it slightly the wrong way. Or in most of the time, when we are dealing with people around us, our intentions are often neither pure nor are they very bad. We're just talking to people in an ordinary way, just to do business or whatever. That's kind of grey karma. It's neither here nor there, right? It's only occasionally that our karma is very clear one way or another. Most of the things we do during daily life is neither one way or another way. But basically, if the intention really is good, maybe the idea of the woman with a child is not such a good thing, because really there's two different actions there. One is the feeding of the child, another one is the stealing. And then maybe that one is good karma and one is bad karma. But even in that case, the bad karma is not going to be so bad, because the intention isn't that bad. Anyway, so I'm not sure if I'm being very clear here, but I hope you're getting the gist of what I'm saying. So let's move on to the next question. How to differentiate restraint and suppression of the five senses. For example, when we face death or family, we may tend to suppress the sad feeling. How to restrain the feeling rather than suppress it. Okay, that is a good question. And often you find that in the translation, often the way that the Dhamma is talked about, people often talk about suppressing the five hindrances, right? In other words, suppressing has a sense of holding it down, kind of pressing it down by force. That's often the idea of suppressing it. And I think you have to be very careful using that sort of language, because suppression often leads people to think that willpower is the best way to overcome the five hindrances. And if we think of that as the best way, and then perhaps we take the word restraint to mean the same thing as using force, gritting your teeth, to be able to suppress these hindrances, then I think that is the wrong way. That's why I was saying before, it's better to think of this in terms of using wisdom power rather than willpower. To understand that these defilements are dangerous, to understand you don't want to go in that direction, and then to learn all this beautiful means to actually guide your mind in a different way. Understand the danger. Then once you understand the danger, understand the skillful means that take you in a different direction. So this is much better. This is using wisdom. And if you use wisdom in this way, then those unwholesome mindsets can be overcome like that. If you use willpower to overcome them, if you're just pressing it down, right, they pop up back at any moment. If you use wisdom instead, you you can eliminate them and they can stay away for quite a long period of time. So this is the difference between proper restraint and improper restraint, if you like. Try always to use the wisdom. Sometimes you have to use a bit of willpower, because sometimes the mind is very stubborn and you find yourself in a difficult situation and you have to use a little bit of willpower. Sometimes it's okay, but generally speaking, you should always try to use wisdom first. Wisdom is much more powerful though. So when you feel sad and you have to suppress your feelings because you're feeling sad because a family member has died. So again, how you restrain that is to think, well, why are you sad if a family member has died, right? Was it a good family member? And if it was a good family member, feel happy, right? They have died, they have done good in life, they haven't wasted the opportunity, they have spent their life well. Good on you, well done for having had such a good life. That's how you should think, right? And then wish them happiness into the future existence. How fortunate I was to have you around, a good person around me, and how fortunate I was to have you there, and you have made my own life so much better. I understand so much more because of you. Wow, what a great thing that was. Well done. May you have happiness and joy into the future life because you were such a good person. There's no basis there for being sad if somebody has done something good. Think like that, right? It doesn't always work. Sometimes you will still feel a bit sad, but it's amazing how you can change your perception by just changing your ideas a little bit. Then you can actually think about these things completely differently. Now, if somebody is a real scallywag, a really dodgy character, then we don't feel so sad when they die, right? That's when you should feel sad, right? They wasted their life. Oh, what a terrible thing. And now they have died, and they've kind of gone on, and who knows whether they've been reborn because they did so many dodgy things while they were alive. That's when you should feel sad, and then we don't feel sad. I'm not saying that we should feel sad then either, but then, okay, we let them go, they did their best, and then you wish them well into the future regardless, because often there isn't that much we can do about these things. So often it is just a matter of changing our perception slightly, and we can turn sadness into, even into a joyous thing if you think about things in the right way. Okay, so now we have come down to the last question. Okay, how does a raped or abused person overcome his or her feelings towards the aggressor and forgive the aggressor? How much is required to practice compassion towards the aggressor and to practice metta towards oneself? Okay. So if somebody has abused you in a bad way, of course it is understandable that it's very hard to forgive, right? And if you want to forgive such a person, you have to just go very slowly. You cannot expect these things to happen overnight. It's not going to happen just like that. So you have to take it very gradually, stage by stage. And the first thing, as I've been saying today, is just to understand that they have probably hurt themselves more than anyone else. It's difficult to accept that when you have been hurt badly by someone else. But the reality is that they probably hurt themselves most of all, because they are going to feel terrible about that later on. If you do something very violent towards somebody else, usually you feel terrible about it afterwards. And if you don't feel terrible about it, it's even worse, because it means you have no conscience. And if you have no conscience, it's really going to be detrimental to you in the future. So try to understand that. And why did they do the act of abuse in the first place? Because they are messed up inside, right? Because their mind is in the wrong place, because they don't understand right from wrong, because they are run by all these powerful emotions inside, anger, aggression, violence, desire, all these things inside of them which are running their lives. They are incapable of actually living a good life. So this is how you need to think. And when you think like that, then gradually, don't expect miracles to happen, don't expect these things to happen overnight. It's not going to happen overnight. But gradually, things will start to change inside of you. And at the same time, of course, also make sure that you have compassion for yourself, because you also were in a very difficult situation, and you have that compassion for yourself at the same time. But often, having metta for oneself is not opposed to having compassion for others, right? If you want to have real metta for yourself, if you're able to be compassionate towards others first, it actually helps you to also have compassion and metta for yourself. So two things actually usually go hand in hand. Okay.
Ajahn,
Yes.
can I ask two questions?
Of course, yeah.
The first one is the meaning of the targeta. Very
Okay.
often they say first come, but it's not clear what it really means.
Yes.
And I'd like to have, if you could give me a good explanation of the targeta.
Yeah.
Secondly, we notice that when we read the sutras,
Yeah.
when it comes to the precepts, it's normally the first 4 precepts that has been mentioned.
Yeah.
The 5th precept, like for instance, even under the elephant footprint, is missing.
Yeah.
Is it because that the
Yeah.
5th precept was added much later?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let's take the targeta one first. Now, if you read there's a commentary which explains the meaning of the targeta. I think it gives about 6 different possible meanings for the word. And one of them is thus come, another one is thus gone. Another word I think is arrived at the truth, because tattva can often mean the idea of truth in Buddhism. So basically, it doesn't really have any clear meaning yet. There is no explanation in the sutras what it means. And it seems to be a word that was used prior to Buddhism as someone who is highly attained in the spiritual sense. You know, you have the 10 unanswered questions, right? What happens to the Tathagata after he dies, right? And that was part of the kind of general questions that were around prior to the Buddha. So it seems like it's very hard to actually know exactly what it means. And I think the meaning is probably actually irrelevant. The idea is just that some kind of mysterious person who has very profound insight. And the word itself is a bit mysterious. Maybe that is part of the point. It's supposed to be a bit mysterious to kind of show that there is something powerful, deep with this person. Perhaps. It's just a guess on my part. Some people like to translate as the one who has reached truth, or attained to come to truth, which is just quite a nice translation of the Tathagata, I find it. So that is the first one, and that is the idea of the 5th precept. Is it really, was it added later on? It is true that it isn't often in the gradual training like here. One reason for that could be because it's taught to the monastic sangha. And of course, a lot of the modest monastic rules are not actually part in the gradual training as such. They come in the Patimokkha, for example. But there is certainly a rule in the Dikha Patimokkha against drinking. As a monk, you can't drink. And that rule, as far as I know, exists across all the different Patimokkha's. So it must have been there from very early on. So obviously, for a monastic to drink wouldn't be right. As far as the precepts are concerned, and if you know the 5th precept, basically it says that you're not supposed to drink because it is a basis for heedlessness, pramadātthana, right? So it leads to heedlessness. And the problem with drinking is perhaps not so much the drinking itself, but it's actually the action and the consequences on your mind and on your behavior that actually are the problem. So when you talk about something which is unwholesome, it may not be unwholesome in its own right, but it's unwholesome. The consequences of how it actually makes you act, I think perhaps is the unwholesomeness. So you have the 10 ways of unwholesome actions, the dasag akusala karmas, and of course drinking is not part of that. The unwholesome karmas is your mental attitude, your anger, your desire, and basically your general out of controlness in terms of body and speech. And if that is what happens when you drink, then of course that is the problem. Generally speaking, when you drink, if you drink very, very little, it may not matter so much. But even if you drink a little bit, you start losing your mindfulness, you start losing your clarity, you start losing a sense of what is right and what is wrong, basically. So I think that is, I don't think it's added later. I think it's just that it's not so central to the idea of morality as the other factors of the 5 precepts. That's what I would say, because it does occur in a few other places in the sutras as well. It does occur in different contexts. But you're quite right. It is curious that it actually is absent from a few very central and important teachings. It is a curious fact and an interesting fact indeed.
Ajahn, one last question.
Yes.
Before the Lord Buddha was enlightened, what is he called? A bodhisattva? A bodhisattva?
What was it called before he was enlightened? It's interesting, in the sutras it does actually call himself a bodhisattva before he was enlightened, but only in the last life, right? Only from the point he left the home when he was about 30 years old or whatever, from the point that he actually set out searching in this life. That's when he was a bodhisattva, because he was searching for the truth. So at that point he was called a bodhisattva. Before that, there's very little evidence that he was called a bodhisattva, or he called himself a bodhisattva before that. And the meaning, another thing which is interesting is the meaning of bodhisattva. And sometimes it's often said to be bodhisattva. Bodhisattva meaning like enlightenment being. But it's a rather strange thing, enlightenment being. What does that mean? It's not very clear what that's supposed to mean. But it has been suggested that the meaning is actually bodhisattva, the Sanskrit word bodhisattva, which actually means what who is intent on awakening. That makes more sense, right? The one intent on awakening makes more sense than the enlightenment being, which is much more obscure what I'm actually supposed to mean. I need a break now, I think. Anyway, so okay. I think it's my place to get the call now.
Can I make a
I want to applaud everybody for attentively listening to the Sutta from 9 to 5. Yeah. Great effort. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu.
And thank you also to Ajahn